Hello and welcome back to reaDIYsteaDIY. If it's your first time here, thank you for joining us. If you're already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. Well, if you saw last week's video about paint matching, you know I've got some extra paint left over that matches the paint that's already on the walls of this house. So now I'm walking around thinking about all kinds of stuff I could fix. Next project up, this guy. Well, as you can see, there was a repair done here long before I got here. Yes, that's right. This week I'm going to try and redo this repair that was done about 8 years ago. So if you want to see how I took this wall from this to this using the California patch technique, stay tuned until the end. Let's get going. So drywall, as it's commonly called, is also called plasterboard. It's sometimes called wallboard. Basically, it consists of 2 sheets of fairly thick paper that sandwich a piece of gypsum in between them. Compared to other wall materials like wood or plaster, gypsum boards are much lighter, they're much cheaper, they're fire retardant, which is pretty cool, but also they're really easy to repair. Drywall was invented in 1916, and it was invented as a cheap alternative to plaster. But by the mid-50s, it had taken over in North America, and basically now, if you walk into any dwelling, you're most likely to find drywall on the walls of that dwelling. As I say, drywall is super easy to repair. That's one of the reasons why it's so popular. But for some reason, there's a lot of homeowners and DIY people that just feel totally intimidated to do any work on the walls of their home at all. And I gotta say, I understand that. Your very first time doing any drywalling, cutting into your dining room wall, probably a little intimidating. That makes a lot of sense to me. But remember this, first of all, you can't be good at anything if you don't practice. You weren't born knowing everything. Everything you know now that you're really good at now, you got there by practicing, whatever it is. This holds true for drywalling as well. Ramp up to it. I started by just grabbing a scrap piece of drywall and punching a hole in it, then fixing the hole. Did it look beautiful? No. It looked terrible because it was my first try. Of course it looked terrible, but drywall is pretty forgiving. It's pretty easy to fix. So I look at this repair. This is a reasonable repair to me. It doesn't look good. You can't sand it. You can't paint over it. That's true. But 8 years ago, the woman I live with now, this is her place. She was faced with a pretty big hole in the wall. Her dogs put it there while they were playing. She needed to fix it. She needed to fix it then. She got out a patch kit with some mesh, some mud, and she did this. She made some mistakes. It's pretty clear. She didn't push out the excess mud. You can see some of it oozed down and then hardened, and it doesn't look that great. But critters cannot crawl in through the hole. Heat cannot escape out through the hole. The wall is just as soundproofed as it was previously. Generally speaking, from a practical perspective, there's nothing wrong with this repair. It just doesn't look great. So now we've got this paint, as you know from last week's video. It'll do like anywhere in the house. So the goal is to paint over it. I can't sand this, I can't paint it, so I gotta cut it out and start again. But just to reiterate, I'm not saying a repair like this is wrong or bad. It would have been better to practice something like this in advance of an emergency on a scrap piece of drywall. This is generally how your first drywalling experience looks. But in the end, it worked for her. It lasted 8 years. She was happy with it. I gotta say, mission accomplished. But today we're gonna try something a little different. I'm gonna cut out this repair. I'm gonna do a California patch, sometimes called a butterfly patch, and then I'm gonna sand and paint over it. Hopefully, you'll never know there was a hole there. We'll see how I do. The first problem is I gotta cut out the previous repair. And a lot of people would just grab a drywall saw, which is sometimes called a jab saw. Basically, it's a very sharp, 6-inch long, serrated blade. You stab your wall with it and you start hacking. You can cut through drywall super easy with a drywall saw. The problem is, in this scenario, I don't know what's on the other side of this wall, and I can't find out until I make the hole. But by then it might be too late. If I use a drywall saw to make the hole and cut out this previous repair, I could end up stabbing into a whole host of things. There could be electrical back there, plumbing, phone line. I don't know what's back there, and I don't want to be unsafe. What I want to do is cut into the wall to as shallow a depth as possible while still cutting the drywall. In order to do that, I'm going to use my Olfa knife. That way I control the depth of the blade, and I cut into the drywall only as far as I'm comfortable. I know it's 1/2-inch drywall. I'm gonna push the blade out no more than 1/2 inch because I'm scoring here. Remember, I can go over each cut a couple of times. And just to be extra safe, I'm gonna kill the breaker and turn the power off. I get out my speed square and I start scoring. Scoring, you don't have to push really hard with scoring. It doesn't matter what you're scoring. It's better to do multiple passes that are light than one big one that's a giant gouge. Reason for that is you can control the light passes better and you don't overshoot. It's way safer for your material. It's way safer for you. So I score all the way around until I'm all the way through the drywall. I pull out the waste and I'm left with a 7-inch by 7-inch hole. It's pretty square. The edges are strong. And as you can see, there's no electrical. Luckily, there's no plumbing. There is a fair bit of insulation back there. So using the Olfa knife instead of the drywall saw, probably a good idea. So now I've got a fairly square 7 by 7 hole that I have to plug. So then I hold up a piece of drywall I have pre-cut. I've cut this to be bigger than the hole. You want to have at least 2 inches of overhang on each dimension of your piece of drywall. A little more won't hurt you. So I hold it up to the wall and I take a couple of measurements just inside the inner dimensions of this hole. And then I mark and score those lines all the way around. Basically, I've created a square within a square, and along the lines of that square within a square, I score them on the brown side of the drywall, and then I snap it off at the score line and I remove the gypsum from the gray side or the front side of the drywall. I'm leaving the paper behind. I do that on all 4 sides. So basically, what I'm left with now is a plug that I know is just smaller than the hole I've made on my wall, so it will fit inside of it. And then I've got these nice sort of butterfly wings around the outside of it, comprised of the paper that I removed the gypsum from, which doubles as tape. I don't need drywall tape when I do this kind of repair. The advantage to not using drywall tape, the paper is thinner than drywall tape, and it's already in line with the face of my plug. It's just a perfect extension of the paper that I'm putting in. So in some ways, it's better than using drywall tape. Before I proceed any further with the repair, we have to talk about furring strips. A furring strip is a piece of pine, typically 1x3, something like that, that you would screw into the back of the wall, which provides an anchoring point for you to screw your plug into so that you have a screw as well as drywall mud holding it in place. A plug that has both a mechanical and a drywall mud connection is going to be way stronger. You need that if it's going to be in a high traffic area or an area where there's some kind of force on it either now or in the future. For example, if you're doing a patch in a ceiling, there's going to be the force of gravity pulling on that patch. If you mud your patch into the ceiling, while it's drying, gravity's pulling it down to the ground. It's going to pull it out of alignment. Also, if you're repairing a part of a wall that's up at eyeball height, that's typically where we hang pictures, mirrors, clocks. 5-10 years from now, someone could come along to your wall and say, oh, I'm going to hang a picture here right on your patch. If you don't have a furring strip in behind to mechanically connect the patch to the wall, it's not going to take the nail very well. It's not as strong. So you have to sort of judge patch by patch, situation by situation, what the best course of action is. If in doubt, adding a furring strip, if you can, is usually a good idea. In my case here, the insulation was really fighting it. It was actually kind of hard to fit a furring strip back there. In this case, no one's hanging a picture way down here. There's definitely no need to worry about that. Also, I know the previous patch had no mechanical connection at all. There's no furring strip back here, and it lasted for 8 years. So whatever traffic this part of the wall sees, just the drywall mud patch has worked for 8 years. I'm going to assume it's going to continue to work. So I'm not going to put a furring strip in here, even though it's a 7-inch hole. It's pretty big. A lot of people would say anything over 8 inches, you must put a furring strip in. So this is pretty close to that. Normally I would consider that. I like to be on the safe side, but in this case, it seems like a cosmetic patch will do. So I dispensed with the idea of doing a furring strip, and I carried on with the repair. And I just sort of do a dry fit. I'm making sure that I've got the dimensions of this right, that it's gonna fit in there fine once I get the mud on it, because once you get the mud on it, it gets kind of messy and it starts to set up, and you want to sort of be nice and smooth at that point. So once the dry fit's done, I know exactly the orientation that it wants to sit in the hole in. I put it down carefully, and then I start applying mud to the inside edges of the hole all the way around, and then also a thin amount to the outside face of the hole on the wall. Likewise, I put a little bit of mud on the edges of the gypsum on my drywall plug, and that way, every surface that's going to come in contact between the plug and the wall, all of those surfaces have mud on it. That's going to adhere this patch to the wall and keep it in place. Once I feel like I've got enough to adhere the patch to the wall, I push it in place, and then I use my knife to squeeze out any excess, always working from the inside out. All of the excess drywall mud gets pushed out to the edges, and then I do a skim pass around the edges of the drywall patch, and then I leave it. I'm gonna let it dry. I'm gonna let it dry overnight. So I sand it down and then I do another coat. Basically, I'm covering the whole patch at this point, getting drywall mud all the way across it so that the whole patch is completely concealed by one thin layer of drywall. You don't need too much. At the end, I put down my 6-inch knife. I pick up a 10-inch knife. The wider knife makes it much easier to make this surface flat and perfect. And then I let it dry. There's always going to be a little bit of a hump because you are adding material to a wall that didn't have it before, but you want that hump to be as smooth as possible, at least to the eye. And the way you can check is by putting light to the side, as I've done here. That'll augment any undulations in the wall by giving it a bit of a shadow. You'll see right away. If you can make your wall look good with side lighting, it's always going to look better under flat light than under direct side lighting. So use the side lighting, you'll see all your mistakes, and then when you go back to normal lighting in the room, it's going to look that much better. So then you wipe off any excess dust. Now it feels really smooth to the touch. It looks really good. I apply either primer first, then paint, or I just paint right over it, whatever I need to do, and then I'm done. Is it laser perfect? Totally not. You can see a little mistake right here, but under normal lighting circumstances like this, I think it looks pretty good. And making a little mistake like that, I'd say that's expected. It's just something I get to improve on next time. So anyway, I hope that helped you out. If it did, please feel free to like or subscribe. Liking or subscribing to a channel and hitting the bell button for notifications really means a lot to a channel. If you could do that for me, I'd really appreciate it. But even if you don't, hey, please feel free to leave a comment. I'm sure there's a lot of drywalling pros out there. You've probably got some great tips you can add. Feel free to leave those in the comment section below. And until next week, take care, stay safe, have fun with your DIY projects, and I'll see you next Saturday.